W.
There's a treasure for everyone in our 2021 WTTW Great Treasure Hunt Sweepstakes. 40 winners will win fun in the sun for the whole family with admission for 4 to Chicagoland's very own Santa's Village Amusement Park. Enjoy thrill rides, petting zoos, water parks, and more. Or enter today for your chance to experience Mackinac Island, Michigan. You and a guest will step back in time on this northern Carless Island with a 3-night bed and breakfast getaway at the historic Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island. Don't miss your chance. Enter today at WTTW.com/sweepstakes or call 773-509-1111 extension 2.
Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by viewers like you and by the following.
Number one value is integrity. Always do the right thing.
We care about people, we want them to be safe, and we want them to know that when they come into the clinic that they're going to be safe doing that.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center.
She was the ultimate agitator and feared because of it.
As racial terror reigned over the South, a young African-American woman struck back with her pen.
There was never a time when Ida B. Wells was not getting pushed back.
Black Lives Matter is addressing the same issues that Ida B. Wells took up in the 1880s and 90s.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the generosity of the Lloyd A. Fry Foundation.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
the city of Chicago will no longer require masks for fully vaccinated people in most settings.
Chicago's top doctor on the city's updated mask guidelines and what's now safe for the fully vaccinated.
It's necessary for us to transition.
Illinois education leaders say students and schools should prepare to get back in the classroom.
A direct deposit into your account.
What President Biden's new monthly child tax credit means for your family.
The city is diving right into summer with the return of Lollapalooza, among other things. But is it too much too soon? Our Spotlight Politics team weighs in.
To be back, which is like being in your living room, it feels like home.
A new home for the Joffrey and new roommates for the Lyric Opera as both companies announce plans to return to live performances this fall.
The politics of black hair, looking at the discrimination of black hairstyles in schools and workplaces.
And puppets and personal experience come together for a look at racial profiling. But first, some of today's top stories. Pretty soon the public will have access to police misconduct files dating back to 2000. In a story first reported by WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon, the mayor and aldermen have agreed to establish a database of Chicago Police Department misconduct files that would include sustained and dismissed complaints. The database was recommended by City Inspector General Joe Ferguson, but today Ferguson criticized this plan along with transparency advocates, saying that it is significantly smaller than the plan originally put forth. And we'll have more on this story later in the program in Spotlight Politics. Illinois public health officials report more than 1,600 new cases of COVID-19 and 28 additional deaths. That brings the total number of cases to 1.37 million and 22,494 deaths. Officials also report more than 38% of the state's population is fully vaccinated. Former Illinois Lieutenant Governor Corinne Wood has died. Wood was the first woman to serve as Lieutenant Governor of the state. She served in the administration of former Illinois Republican Governor George Ryan from 1999 to 2003. And here she is on Chicago Tonight in 1999. Wood also served many years in the Illinois General Assembly. She was 66 years old.
Now now they're going to be increased.
Chicagoans, you can officially take the masks off. The city announced the new mask policy, aligning it with the new guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. However, the city's top doctor, Allison Arwady, says she strongly advises businesses to still require people to wear masks unless they can verify that they are fully vaccinated. And Mayor Lori Lightfoot says she will continue masking herself for now. And joining us now to help us understand the new guidelines is Dr. Allison Arwady, Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Public Health. Dr. Arwady, good to see you as always. And let's take a look at some of the changes here regarding masks and the new advice. So masks are no longer mandated for those fully vaccinated in most settings. Masks are still required in city-owned buildings and in hospitals, schools, and on public transit. And businesses are strongly advised to verify that people are vaccinated. So Dr. Arwady, you've seen that there is still some confusion among the public over what the new rules are. Is there anything you want to add to that or clarify about that?
Sure. I just remind folks that CDC guidance applies to people who are fully vaccinated 2 weeks post their second dose of vaccine, if they've gotten Pfizer or Moderna, or 2 weeks post their Johnson & Johnson dose. And if you are not fully vaccinated, you do need to continue wearing a mask. What we felt was that it was appropriate to follow the CDC guidance, follow the state, drop the mask mandate. But we know that it's hard for businesses to check vaccination status. And so for the short-term future here, while we still have some of the restrictions in place, still recommending that unless businesses feel like they have the capacity to check, encouraging them to continue to have masks in place. And this is going to be a dime.
And there are some businesses that have gotten rid of the mask mandate. So how difficult will it be for them to verify whether folks are vaccinated?
Yeah, well, I think this is the challenge. It's not like we walk around, we don't have a vaccine passport. We're not wearing something obvious that says whether someone is vaccinated. We certainly are asking people if they are not to do the right thing and wear the mask, but we know not everybody is likely to do that. And so, if a business has made that decision, we would hope that they are asking to see people's vaccine cards, or at least asking them. We know that may not be happening. We are in this transition phase, and I would just encourage people to do the right thing. And if they have concerns themselves, again, for the short term, keep wearing that mask. I certainly am continuing to wear it when I'm in indoor settings. Again, just for the short term here, really until we get to phase 5.
And phase 5, which might be in place by the time Lollapalooza happens in late July, and that festival announced it's coming back in full force to Grant Park without capacity limits. Is there a risk here with the virus still around in some capacity that it could be a super spreader event?
So the reason that we felt confident bringing Lollapalooza back were a few things. Number one, we are expecting to be at that phase 5 open capacity by then, maybe even before then, if we keep seeing good progress. Number two, it's outdoors. But number three, everybody attending is going to need to be either fully vaccinated or get a test every single day of attendance showing that they're negative. With those things in place, vaccination really does help protect. We feel confident that we'll be able to bring this back really as safely as possible.
And so does that mean those at the gate are going to have to check every single person? And now there's upwards of 400,000 people that attend over those 4 days. They're going to have to check every person, attendee, for a vaccination card or a proof of a negative test. It sounds to me like there could be very long lines to get in.
Yeah, so we're not planning an on-site check of that. There's going to be more information coming by early July. There will be the opportunity to be sharing that information in advance, likely electronically. We're working on some of the details of that. Obviously, this has been a larger conversation, but we will figure out, and Lollapalooza is very committed to figuring out the way to operationalize this. Bottom line, you want to make this easy for yourself, get vaccinated now so that you're fully vaccinated. Remember, 2 weeks post your second dose. By the time we get to the end of July, beginning of August, and Lollapalooza.
All right, we're going to follow exactly how that's going to work, and we have about a month and a half or 2 months to figure that out before Lollapalooza and other concerts and festivals happen. At the same time, the rate of vaccination is slowing. It's way down from where it was. Do you think that incentives like going to Lollapalooza, going to other festivals, will get some of those holdouts into the vaccination line?
Yeah, we think certainly that's part of it. Most people, of course, are getting vaccinated to protect themselves, their families, their communities. But we know that there are people who may get tipped over that decision point by the opportunity to go to a concert or win an incentive. And where that makes sense and it's in line with our goals, it's certainly something we're supporting. We will be sharing more incentives tied to vaccination related to Lollapalooza, but also to other events. And we've had lots of people really stepping up around the city saying, I want to help. I want to get Chicago back. What can I do to help encourage people to get vaccine? And it's been a really nice way to see Chicago step up.
And the news around the vaccine has been almost universally positive, except for the fact that people with compromised immune systems, there's some data showing that the vaccine isn't quite effective. People with conditions like rheumatoid or arthritis, you're hearing of people getting breakthrough cases or even dying. So what should people with autoimmune diseases do to stay safe?
Yeah, so always we recommend people with autoimmune diseases or really any individual concerns, have that conversation with your doctor. The recommendation is still very much to get vaccinated, but there are some concerns that your protection level may not be as high. And so, for example, they may recommend that you continue to wear a mask, continue to distance. This is a small number of people, though, I want to emphasize. It's not everybody with, any potential autoimmune problem, but there have been a limited number of folks who the vaccine you don't mount as much of an immune response. And for those folks, those are other reasons why you may see people, even if they're vaccinated, continuing to wear masks or if you've got someone who's at risk. But for the great majority of people, getting vaccinated is by far the best protection. Vaccine's safe, it's effective. We're so lucky to have a vaccine that remains protective against all of the known variants. And getting vaccinated now is how we protect everybody at the population level.
It's a small group of people, but it's people that we know, and folks with autoimmune diseases will be concerned about that. Also, there still is a bit of a lag in the black and brown communities. Why does that still exist at this point?
There is, and that's something that we've seen all over the country. We actually, when you look at the largest cities, Chicago has the best coverage for both Latinx and Black Chicagoans, but it is nowhere near enough. And I think it's a combination of there's still people who feel like I don't need to get the vaccine if I had COVID, which isn't true. You should still get the vaccine even if you had and recovered from COVID. People feeling like they're not at risk, and then just people who have very busy lives. We've been working to bring vaccine into communities that are less vaccinated all over the city and really making it convenient for folks. And it's not so much, there are some people who say I'm never getting vaccinated, more who say, oh, this is convenient for me, let me tick this off in terms of something to do. So every day we're seeing those numbers tick up. It's certainly something we continue to be very focused on.
All right, Dr. Allison Arawati, thank you for joining us as always.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. Take it as another sign that the pandemic is in a new stage. Illinois schools have been operating under pandemic state regulations and disaster proclamations. Education leaders today, though, focus their attention on the day those special orders will be lifted. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Yeah, Brandis, with graduation, finals, for some prom, whether it be in person or virtual, all of those things on the immediate horizon, well, it's likely that a whole lot of students aren't quite ready to turn their attention already to the next school year. But the Illinois State Board of Education is, yes, already planning for fall, making the decision today with a vote to require all schools be fully in person for the 21 to 22 school year.
Although online classes are a far better option than no classes at all, multiple studies show that students learn best when present in person alongside their teachers, peers, and support network. That's especially true for children who struggle academically or who struggle with mental health.
According to the state's latest figures from earlier this month, the majority of students are currently doing a blend of in-person and remote learning. Roughly 420,000, you can see that in the lime green bar, are fully in person. But come next year, a declaration from State School Superintendent Carmen Ayala means that school hallways won't be empty anymore. Now, there are limited exceptions. The resolution explicitly calls for remote instruction being made available to students who are not eligible for a COVID vaccine and who are under a potential quarantine order by the state or local health department, if there is one. Now, ISB made this decision despite protestations from parents like a West Aurora mom whose third grader's immune system doesn't function properly.
Making a broad decision to push all schools back to 5 days a week without widespread student vaccination for elementary students is premature. My students will both be vaccinated as soon as they possibly can. However, my youngest might not hold the vaccine himself. He and other students with health issues need widespread vaccine distribution in schools to be safe.
She says that her son, under ISB's rules, would qualify for being able to continue to learn virtually, but she says his classmates wouldn't. She says that her family has been incredibly isolated for some 432 days, and online learning is her son's lifeline to normalcy.
Having friends on the other side of the screen is the only thing keeping him engaged in school right now. We've been incredibly isolated for the last 432 days. This decision would further isolate children with health issues. Please allow students who are not old enough to be vaccinated to remain virtual for any reason.
Several members of the board also expressed reservations and concerns. Board member Donna Leake is also the superintendent of District 168 out of Sauk Village.
We're going to have to do a lot of work to help schools be able to really know that we're doing the right thing, that we're following CDC, we're following Department of Public Health, and that it's, again, that it's reasonable. If I'm a high school soup and you tell me I got to bring everybody back and they have to be 3 feet apart, I don't have the space to do that.
Now, at one point, Leak even suggested changing the language. So instead of mandating a return to schools, it would encourage schools, saying that they should return to in-person learning. But that suggestion got shut down, with ISBE staff saying that that would only cause more confusion. They say a big reason that ISB wanted to take a vote on this requirement now is so that school administrators have time to make staffing and budget decisions, and it also helps families with their own planning. Now, there is no mandate that students get the COVID vaccine, though Superintendent Ayala says ISB does encourage it. She says that the state is going to provide plentiful guidance to schools, with public health guidance evolving, the situation evolving generally, and that's going to continue over the summer. Now, all of this, as the future of certain students who attend private schools is also in flux. Illinois is 3 academic years into a program that allows individuals and businesses to donate to a private school scholarship fund for low-income students, and then in exchange, these donors can get a tax credit worth 75% of what they gave. Governor J.B. Pritzker, in his proposed budget, wants to bring that tax credit down to 40%. Advocates of the program, like the head of the scholarship granting organization Empower Illinois, he says that that would dissuade the small donors who are the lifeblood of the scholarship program and depend on that tax credit. And he says that potentially means that students could lose their scholarships.
So certainly what's proposed currently is we do consider an existential threat to the program. But I will also take the governor at his word, saying he wants to find a way to not cut scholarships. And so I think there's room there for a conversation. Certainly the 22,000 scholarship recipients over the past 3 years, the many tens of thousands more who want these, their voices are being heard, and we hope that we can bring that to the table.
Pritzker also recommending that other tax credits be done away with as part of the budget plan. And so look for all of that to be in heated negotiations these next couple of weeks in Springfield. Back to you guys in the studio.
Amanda, thank you. And now to Paris for debate over the child credit expansion. Paris.
Brandis, this summer, nearly 40 million American families will be eligible to start receiving monthly direct deposits in their bank accounts. The expansion of the child tax credit is included in President Joe Biden's American Rescue Plan that was signed into law in March.
90% of the families, all middle-class and working-class families, will get this tax cut. It's a one-year cut that reduces your taxes by $3,000 a year for each child you have under the age of 18. 2 kids, it's a $6,000 tax cut. And if those kids are under the age of 6, they'll actually get $3,600 per child.
Now, while some are praising the effort to reduce child poverty, others are wondering if the IRS is equipped to deliver on such a big feat. And joining us to provide their perspectives are David Henderson, a research fellow at the conservative think tank, the Hoover Institution, and a professor emeritus of economics at the Naval Postgraduate School in California, and Jeremy Rosen, director of economic justice at the Shriver Center on Poverty Law, a local group aimed at pursuing economic and racial justice. Welcome, both of you, gentlemen. And before I get into questions, I just want to get into what this expanded child tax credit entails. So it's $3,600 per child, ages 6 and under, $3,000 per child between ages 6 and 17, and that's an increase from where it was $2,000 per child, 0 to 17, back in 2020 and before. And of course, we should mention there are income limits in receiving these benefits. David Henderson, the president says this could cut child poverty in half and would especially help low-income families. Do you see it that way?
Well, I do, but I think there's a big problem with it, which is that it's a transfer essentially to people not for doing anything, but for having children. And I think that's a very bad way to go.
Jeremy Rosen, what about that? I mean, so David is saying it probably would cut childhood poverty, but it's giving money just for the sake of having children.
Well, it's not just for the sake of having children. It's recognizing that in this country we don't support families very well. And if we want to make sure that the economy is working well, that folks are working, that families are stable, we should do what most countries in the Western Hemisphere and Europe, many of our peer nations do, and begin to think about offering a child allowance to families in our country. And this program would be a first step in that direction. We think it's very important.
So, David, as a conservative, do you believe that there is a different approach that would achieve the same outcome of cutting childhood poverty down and helping low-income families defray some of these costs?
I'm not a conservative, but I do think there's a better way. I mean, the number one way out of poverty is having a full-time job. So if you have two people together who have full-time jobs, they will not be poor in this country, and they can build up their earnings and then have kids once they're settled, once they have those earnings. So I think that's a much better way. Get rid of, there are 800 occupations in which people need some kind of government permission to operate and to work. And 29% of the labor force is in those occupations, up from 5% 60 years ago. So get rid of those restrictions, get rid of a lot of those restrictions, and make it easier for people to get work.
Jeremy Rosen, part of this plan is giving monthly payments to families between $200 and $300 instead of just claiming a refund once a year on your tax return. Talk about the impact of that, having that option.
That's going to be a huge impact. For folks to know that predictably every month for the rest of the year from July through December, they're going to get a cash payment that they can plan for to use for important expenses in their household. It's critical. This is really a pro-family plan and a plan that will cut child poverty tremendously in our country. I'm not really sure how anyone could possibly object to that.
And indeed, the Utah Republican Senator Mitt Romney agrees in principle on a similar plan. His plan would actually provide more money, and there would be no income limits on being able to receive those benefits. David Henderson, what about that plan?
Well, that's even more expensive. It isn't that there are no income limits, but the income limits are about $500,000 a year for, for a married couple. No one could call them poor. So I think it's a way more expensive plan.
And what about the criticism, Jeremy Rosen, that the IRS is going to have trouble sort of identifying who qualifies here and setting up a system whereby families can receive this benefit?
Well, I'd say this. I think they have set up a system, and they've said that they're going to start making these payments in July. So I'm optimistic that it's going to work well. I think we'd certainly prefer in the long run a permanent plan, because this, of course, is just a one-year plan, as the president noted. And if we established a permanent plan, I would expect that we could do even better at streamlining how people would receive those benefits. But I'm expecting this plan to work tremendously well, get money into people's pockets as the recovery goes forward.
And,
Can I point out one other thing?
Sure, go ahead, David.
We care about children, but children become adults. And so when they become adults, they're going to be facing their share of a huge, huge federal debt. And we are so buried in debt now, and that's only increasing. And that's another reason I think this is, I mean, if you ever wondered about how to time this, this is not the time.
Well, Jeremy Rosen, you know, the president has also proposed a $1.8 trillion American Families Plan that, among other things, would further help defray child care costs, and he is proposing to pay for that partially through higher taxes on higher income earners. What effect do you think that would have on lower income families and the economy at large?
Well, that's right, Paris. And in fact, the president's plan proposes to extend this particular child tax credit that we're talking about through 2025. And, you know, my colleague mentions the national debt, but the president's plan includes a proposal to pay for this and by raising taxes on the highest income folks in our country who have done very, very well, even as middle class and working class folks in our country have struggled in the current economy. So we think.
All right, looks like we froze up, but we have to leave it there. Our thanks to David Henderson and Jeremy Rosen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, a Chicago puppeteer's experience with racial profiling, so please stay with us.
It really is about community where we all come together.
Chicago needs to make space for everyone.
There's much more ahead on the program, including our Spotlight Politics team on the governor lifting Illinois' eviction ban. But first, racial profiling has been front and center in the national conversation over the past year and even longer. A member of Chicago's theater community turned his personal experience into a short film with the help of the Chicago Puppet Festival. Here's a look at a one-man, one-puppet show about the consequences of walking while black. Producer Mark Vitale has this story.
It's not about me, right? It's about the puppet. It's about making sure that I put all of my energy into him where he's looking, what he smells, what he hears.
Jarrell Henderson demonstrates how he moves JL, his avatar and co-star of a new short film.
I don't drive, and I get stopped by the police at least 3 times a year. Just walking home from bars, from school, going to or coming from work. Like simple, everyday things that become not so simple and not so ordinary. I saw the cop car pull up. As I walked past, I saw it stop. Ugh.
When he's out in public, Henderson is hyper-aware.
Where are my hands? How am I standing? Do I look aggressive? Will I look aggressive enough for them to stop me? That I don't want to make a natural movement that projects aggressiveness to someone else that might cause them to end my life.
But all I really heard was, you fit the description, you fit the description, you fit the description.
It is something he's had to deal with his entire life.
First time I was followed in the store, I was 8 years old. So, and I didn't know it was happening, so I asked the guy if he had a problem. I resent the fact that I have to break down my human movements because breathing the wrong way or shifting my weight might be seen as an act of aggression for someone who has a weapon and is allowed to discharge that weapon, and I don't have that. I don't understand why the police get to panic with guns and black people who get stopped don't get to panic. That makes no sense to me.
Henderson's stage credits include directing, writing, and performing. He created this haunting version of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, produced by renowned puppet artist Heather Henson, Jim Henson's daughter. Henderson's latest work may be his most personal, even though it depicts a common experience.
So many times, the situations that I find myself in because I happen to be black, I'm not sure if it's reality or if it's just in my own mind. And so when pieces like this are created and other people say, no, you're not crazy, these things happen, you're not alone.
To them, I am the bear.
Whoever can find a message of helpfulness or joy inside of this, or just sometimes the joy that comes from knowing that other people are angry and upset as well. Other people are fed up. Enough, right? That's really what it's all about, right? Beginning to take care of yourself and heal yourself so that you can then help heal others, hopefully.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
Jarrell Henderson's film is called I Am the Bear. It's now available for free viewing via the Chicago International Puppet Theater Festival. You can join us online for more details. And now, Paris, we go back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, curtain call. 2 Chicago arts giants are announcing a return to live onstage performances in the fall, and they're going to be under the same roof. Black hair has been politicized, penalized, and legislated throughout history. As a new bill addressing hair discrimination heads to the Illinois House, we talk about the politics of black hair. And the city is diving right into summer with the return of Lollapalooza, but is it too much too soon? Our Spotlight Politics team weighs in. But first, some more of today's top stories. The U.S. House votes today to approve an independent commission to investigate the January 6th Capitol riots. The vote came with unanimous support from Democrats as well as 35 Republican members who are also in favor. In Illinois, Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger and Rodney Davis voted yes, while Congresswoman Mary Miller and Congressman Mike Bost and Darren LaHood voted against it. The bill now heads to the evenly divided Senate, where Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has come out in opposition. Mayor Lori Lightfoot says she wants to use the occasion of her 2-year anniversary in office to spotlight the issue of diversity among Chicago's journalists. The mayor sent a letter to local media institutions, including WTTW, blasting what she calls the, quote, overwhelming whiteness and maleness of Chicago media outlets. The mayor falsely asserted that there are no women of color in the City Hall press corps, but WBEZ states they have 2 women of color that regularly cover that beat. The mayor's official 2-year mark falls tomorrow, and we'll have more on this in Spotlight Politics coming up. After 15 months of dark theaters and live streaming performances, 2 of Chicago's most famous performing arts companies announced they are returning to the stage for live performances, this time under one roof. Brandis has more on this story. So, Brandis, many of us will be able to guess which 2 esteemed companies we're talking about. Fill us in.
Yeah, of course, and it would be easy to guess Paris, but leaders of Lyric Opera of Chicago and the Joffrey Ballet are calling each other roommates, since the Joffrey will be the resident ballet company at the Opera House this season. The 2 companies announced a full slate of live performances, with seasons starting in September for the opera and October for the ballet, and subscriptions to both are already on sale. We were even treated to a small live performance from both companies during this morning's announcement, but we weren't allowed to film it. Right now, though, you can get a look at video of the Joffrey's famous production of The Nutcracker, which hasn't been on a stage since 2019. It's one of 5 productions the Joffrey is presenting for this coming season. Though the Joffrey has been offering live virtual performances over the last 15 months, keeping professional ballet dancers on point without a season has required extra effort.
They are finely tuned athletes, and that, you know, spending their summer in their kitchen and living room trying to stay in shape is one thing, but really to run a race, you need the space. It's really helped push the company to stay, you know, at the top of their game. You know, even if they're not ready for the full race, they will be come the fall.
Here's a look at a couple of those virtual performances from the Joffrey that have kept those dancers in shape and working since last fall. The 2 companies announced plans to share space several years ago, and it was supposed to have started in the fall of 2020, but of course, the pandemic put a stop to that. The Joffrey had been performing at the Auditorium Theater for years, but artistic director Ashley Weeder explains why this partnership just makes sense.
A business model which works for both of us. This is a state-of-the-art theater, and backstage it has everything that you could ever want. So, you know, whereas before we were always having to load in and load out every single piece of equipment, now everything is here. We walk in the door and we are ready to go.
Now, the Joffrey and the Lyric did collaborate on a production of Orfeo Eurydice a couple years ago. In Paris, I did ask if there might be another joint production like that in the future. Not this season. Everyone is being conservative with their revenue and expenses coming out of the pandemic, but perhaps down the road.
Both such great theaters, the Auditorium and the Lyric, and it's going to be great to see that wonderful theater, the Lyric, have activity. So, Brandis, what can visitors expect to see when they go back to the Opera House?
So, to start, everyone gets a better seat. While the theater was dark, it allowed time for the company to install all new seating throughout the theater. They're more comfortable, can confirm, and there's a staggered layout for better sight lines. There are also wider aisles and therefore better wheelchair accessibility. And in response to keeping COVID at bay, there are other changes. For example, Lyric says it's keeping their operas to 2.5 hours about, and they're skipping the traditional intermission.
There have been a few judicious cuts to the music, but not too severe. But it seemed to us to be important that when we are asking people to buy tickets and have their confidence restored, that they should know that the normal milling around in crowds during intermissions won't be taking place through the fall.
Lyric says ticket holders will also have the option to live stream performances if they should purchase a ticket, but then for whatever reason they feel it's unsafe for them to attend in person, they can watch it at home via the live stream. And this is also the first season for music director Enrique Mazzola as the Lyric's conductor. And as I mentioned earlier, Paris, subscriptions for both companies went on sale today. Back to you.
Very well done, Brandis. Mazzola's debut, long anticipated, because he was on this show a couple years ago when he was introduced as the new director there. All right, thank you very much. And up next, the politics of black hair, explored in a conversation that first aired on Sunday's Chicago Tonight Black Voices. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Black Americans across the country are familiar with the rules that have been imposed on their hair throughout history. Styles traditionally associated with natural black hair, like locks, braids, twists, and afros, have been called everything from distracting to unprofessional in schools and workplaces, leaving many Black Americans feeling pressured to style their hair in ways that conform with Eurocentric ideals. Now, a bill recently passed in the Illinois Senate aims to address black hair discrimination in schools across the state. Joining us now with more are Patrice Grell-Yursik, writer and creator of the beauty blog Afrobella; Ava Thompson-Greenwell, filmmaker, journalist, and professor at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism; and State Senator Mike Simmons, who introduced the bill and whose district includes neighborhoods on Chicago's far north side. All three of you, welcome back to Chicago Tonight, and thanks for joining us. So, Senator Simmons, let's start with you, please. What inspired you to propose this bill?
I've read so many stories in the last year or so of Black youth who have been traumatized by being forced to take out natural hairstyles such as the style that I wear, dreads, freeform locks, braids. And the tipping point for me is when I read about Chet Hawkins, who's a 4-year-old on the west side of Chicago, who was excited to go to school, was excited about his new braids. His mom took him to school and he was forced to take out his braids, and it was a story about it in late March. I read that and said, I have got to take action on this. We need some legislation. We've got to turn the page on this history.
Ava Thompson-Greenwell, you've written about discrimination against black hair in the workplace, especially for black women. What does that look like?
So, you know, there's a real history behind that, particularly in television news where image tends to be everything. And so we have Melva Tolliver, who back in 1971 wore her hair in an afro and was told, you know, you don't look feminine, change your hairstyle. And she was defiant in that way, in that she decided that she was going to keep her hair the way it was. And so she was supposed to be covering a story on Richard Nixon's daughter's wedding and decided that she was going to wear her afro. And they said, no, you can't. And they actually deleted her portion. And so we have come a long way, certainly since the 1970s, but we still have a ways to go, I think. And it starts certainly with children being able to be themselves fully in school. So I'm very happy to hear about this legislation. from Senator Simmons.
And you've even written about some more modern day instances, or similar, not quite the same thing, but modern day instances that still happens to, like you said, to some TV news reporters. Patrice Grell-Yursik, you know, there is more legislation on the horizon regarding black hair. What would something like the Crown Act mean?
So the Crown Act stands for creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. It's been passed in California in 2019. 7 states have passed similar laws. And it means, you know, a protection for us to not be discriminated against in the workplace and in schools. It's so important what Senator Simmons is introducing, and to see acts like this enacted across the country to protect our rights.
And Senator Simmons, how would this bill work?
So the bill, SB 817, would prohibit schools from including any discriminatory language on hairstyles traditionally associated with race and ethnicity, i.e. People whose hair is of African descent. So specifically, the legislation says that you cannot discriminate against dreads, braids, afros, and protective hairstyles. So the enforcement strategy here is once a year, the Illinois State Board of Education will do a compliance audit of all schools in the state, and the handbooks will have to remove any language that would, say that you can't have those kind of hairstyles. And if they're not in compliance, then there would be consequences. The schools could potentially even lose their recognition by the State Board of Education.
And Senator Simmons, you know, you've said that this is something you've experienced personally as well. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of a chronic thing I've experienced, more so in my earlier years when I was a teenager. There was just always, you know, the sense from authority figures, school settings, places like that, I would hear little random comments about my hair. I ran track and field. I remember I'd get it a lot from my people on the team, and the coach would just say the most inappropriate things. And back then, I kind of knew it wasn't right. I felt like a boundary was being crossed, but I didn't really have the language to name it. And I just want to say that, you know, a big part of what I'm trying to do with this legislation, I mean, this is also about mental health, right? The pandemic has already besieged our youth to such a degree. The last thing we need to do is be policing hairstyles. We have much bigger fish to fry. And so, you know, I know what it feels like to have authority figures humiliate and belittle you in front of your peers. As an adult, frankly, I've had instances where other adults have made inappropriate comments, or they'll reach out and they'll even touch one of my locks, which is entirely inappropriate. I always say if their mothers saw them doing that, their mothers would cringe. And that for me is usually the litmus test on that type of behavior and how unacceptable it is. And I don't know that any DEI consulting or cultural sensitivity is going to really fix that, right? If your mom would see that and say that and be embarrassed of that behavior, then that's a pretty obvious line that we shouldn't cross.
I think everybody in this conversation can relate to that experience. Ava, you know, black hair, has a political and a cultural history, obviously. Can you give us some examples of that historical discrimination that we've experienced around our hair?
Well, certainly there have been women, particularly in law firms, in airline work, who have been discriminated, either not promoted or not offered the job because of the way they're wearing their hair. And so this is really affecting their livelihoods. Certainly it is affecting their mental health, as the senator mentions, but it's really, really impacting their wallets. And so I think what we're saying here is that people should have the choice. Their particular racial identity shouldn't dictate the kind of work that they can do, and it shouldn't limit them in terms of their possibilities, professionally or personally.
And Patrice, you say it's not just an American attitude. What can you tell us about your experience when you were growing up in Trinidad?
So yes, born in Trinidad and Tobago, and I've definitely seen stories about this throughout the years. Especially, there's so much discrimination against locks, dreadlocks, as we've called it in the Caribbean traditionally, or braids, just the way that people traditionally have learned to style our hair. There's a Eurocentric standard that has been imposed, I think, across the diaspora, and it's something that we have to examine and try to root out ourselves.
A conversation that we could have all night, but I'm going to have to let you go because we are out of time. My thanks to Ava Thompson Greenwell, Senator Mike Simmons, and Patrice Grell-Yursik for joining us. Back with more Chicago Tonight right after this. Mixed messages on masking from the mayor as summer in the city is starting to look more normal. Our Spotlight Politics team takes a look at all of that and much more. Welcome back, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. So the state and the city finally lined up with the CDC on masking this week, but the mayor says that she's going to keep hers on for now. Amanda, are these mixed messages going to confuse people?
You know, I do think that there's an element of confusion, not just her. The governor also said he's keeping that mask on for now. I think that there's just has been a lot of confusion throughout, of course, this whole pandemic, and this is yet another layer of that. It also is, I think, perhaps a recognition by the city and some of these officials that those who are not vaccinated, who perhaps can't be they children or those who are immunocompromised. This is sort of easing into it a little bit. I also see it as somewhat a pick your battles at this point in time. It's as the weather's getting nicer, more folks are vaccinated, and it might also, by relaxing the masking guidelines, convince people to go ahead and get vaccinated, because then they don't have to pretend. So I mean, I think that there's a lot here. It is confusing, but people just need to remember to be safe, be careful, and I think that's what the city's encouraging.
Heather, you wrote about Lollapalooza's comeback. Is the city allowing a full crowd?
They are. It will be full capacity, rocking 2019 style. And we heard Dr. Allison Arwady say earlier in the show that the city is confident that the city will be fully reopened by July 29th when the festival kicks off, and that they are going to really attempt to verify people's vaccination status and their test status. So I think this is going to really be a test of these big festivals in this post-COVID era that we appear to be entering, and whether or not it's really even possible to verify that information and make people feel safe and ready to mingle in huge crowds like that.
Paris, what do we know about the lineup, and are you putting in for vacation that week?
Don't stop believing, Brandis. We heard that Journey, that band that all those kids are listening to these days, are going to be part of it. The Foo Fighters. I've been to Lollapalooza. It's fun, but I don't think anything jumps out at me this year. Don't think I'll be part of that. And it's going to be interesting to see what exactly they come up with in terms of electronically monitoring who has legitimate COVID vaccination cards. As you heard Dr. Arwady earlier today say, they're not going to make you present the card in line on site, and that would cause lines that probably would last 3-4 hours and wrap around all the way to the Hancock building. So it remains to be seen what this is going to look like.
Amanda, the governor also announces a plan to phase out the evictions ban by August. But as you reported, those housing problems will still persist. What do we know?
Well, yeah, I mean, affordable housing is a persistent issue. It was before the pandemic, but has been only exacerbated by that point in time. Talk to folks who say, no, they don't believe that the lifting of the ban is going to lead to a sudden rush of evictions, but others who say, yeah, this program might not go far enough, be it because of stricter eligibility requirements or because it's just not going to be enough money to cover all of that back rent. And further, landlords say that they are still really struggling, and that they have been too neglected, that this is one-sided on the part of the renters, or perhaps those who have been taking advantage of government guidelines, could have been paying their rent and didn't, and are just going to skip out and sort of take it as a freebie. So we'll be watching that. And also, Brandis, I'll quickly add questions as well on the part of housing advocates about what is to come for people who own homes and have had struggled to pay their mortgage. There's some money for that, but again, is it enough? And we still don't have a lot of answers about how that's going to work.
And Heather, the state is offering $835 million to prevent a tsunami of evictions as the pandemic wanes, but is that enough?
So nobody really knows, because unlike the first round of rental assistance, people can apply for up to $25,000 in rental assistance. And that would cover 15 months of rent, 12 months retroactively, and 3 months in the future. And the hope is that that will really help people get back on their feet as the pandemic wanes. But it's not clear whether that money will flow easily to the people who need it and to the landlords who need it, or whether it's going to get tied up in issues and it's going to take a long time to go. The city of Chicago also has $80 million that it is preparing to open in terms of rental assistance for people who need it. So there's money out there. The task of both the state and the local governments right now is to get it to the people who need it, to prevent that tsunami of evictions that everybody's been worried will happen once the eviction ban lifts.
Okay, so moving on to the story that reporters across the city have been talking about today. Mayor Lightfoot, she tweeted this, she explained it further in a letter. It got out with some other intrepid reporters yesterday that she only wanted black and brown reporters, interviewing her at this 2-year halfway point during her term. Paris, this made national news. It lit Twitter on fire. Are reporters pushing back?
Yeah, they are, Brandis. And let's, in full disclosure, talk about our own experience with this. So at the direction of our boss, I reached out to the mayor's office last week to invite them for an interview on Chicago Tonight for her 2-year anniversary tomorrow. I got word from the press office yesterday that they would be declining our request, saying they would only be doing interviews with black and brown reporters and hyper-local outlets for this round of interviews. So that's what happened on our part. You saw Greg Pratt is a Hispanic Latino reporter at the Chicago Tribune that covers City Hall very closely. He turned down his interview with the mayor in solidarity against this move by the mayor, saying that politicians do not get to choose who interviews them. And this is something that journalists all live by here. In order to ensure the independence for our viewers and our readers, the agenda is set here by journalists here. Who decides who interviews politicians, that's decided here, not by politicians. But there's a lot of other things happening here. The criticism about representation and diversity in journalism is fair game, and Lord knows we know these are things that we're grappling with and all media institutions are grappling with. But also, questioning the mayor's motives here are fair game, because going back to Richard J. Daley, mayors have combative relationships with the press corps. They don't like to be scrutinized, and that is the job of the press corps, to scrutinize the mayor, and sometimes the coverage is going to be critical, and we have had mayors trying to manipulate coverage who don't like that critical coverage of them, and this mayor has made no bones about the fact that she doesn't like some of the coverage from the day-to-day press corps. So you can look at this as the mayor as a tactic, kind of shining the fire back on the media when they have tough questions for her. But Brandis, I want to throw this back to you too, because you've observed the reaction. What struck you about all this?
I've been watching this. Other stations have been covering it, and I've been listening to what some of my fellow African-American journalists in Chicago are saying, and some of them are raising the fact that, she has a point. There's not a newsroom in this country, unless it is a black one in particular, that is immune to this problem with working to make sure that you have the appropriate amount of diversity in your newsroom, that your newsroom reflects the community that you cover. That said, it was a bit of a surprise that this is her tactic, and the National Association of Black Journalists said as much in a statement this evening. While they don't condone the tactic of excluding any bona fide journalist from access to covering the mayor, an elected official in the third largest city in the country, she makes a good point about this. But it's something that journalists of color have been advocating as long as they've been journalists. So it strikes a little strange that this is what she's choosing to focus on right now. Heather, you cover City Hall quite a bit, obviously. What's your reaction to this, and what are you hearing from other City Hall reporters?
Well, I think that we need to hold two thoughts in our heads at the same time. One, that the media at large, and in Chicago in particular, has a problem with diversity. And that is 100% accurate, that the press corps at City Hall does not look like the city. And that's on all of us to really grapple with and attempt to change. At the same time, we can note that we've now spent a good bit of time on tonight's show talking about this, instead of the fact that the mayor is facing a number of different challenges as she approaches the second anniversary mark. She is struggling to get an elected school board bill that would be hybrid, not fully elected through the General Assembly. She's facing challenges on civilian oversight of the police department. She's facing challenges in terms of how to hold officers accountable accountable for misconduct and be transparent with those records. She has a whole host of issues, not to mention the city's recovery from the pandemic, which of course is very much sort of on a knife's edge at this moment. So I think Paris's point about this being a tactic is well taken, while at the same time, I think her call for us to do more about diversity and making sure that the press corps that covers Chicago looks like Chicago is well taken.
While we're on it, Heather, let's go ahead and get into some of that stuff. So she okayed a public database of closed investigations of CPD officers going back to the year 2000. But is this a more watered down version of what activists and even the city's inspector general have called for?
It is. Initially, she balked at the idea of a database in total, saying it was too expensive and unnecessary. She agreed to this compromise measure, which has also won the support of Alderman Scott Wagstaff, the Finance Committee Chair, and Alderman Chris Taliaferro, the Chairman of the Public Safety Committee. But the Inspector General, the city's watchdog, Joe Ferguson, said today that it was significantly scaled back and it would not truly represent transparency for the Chicago Police Department. I also spoke with Jamie Calvin of the Invisible Institute. He was the journalist who forced the records of the Laquan McDonald murder out into the public, who said that this was truly nothing more than smoke and mirrors, because there is so many more records that this database, as proposed and backed by the mayor, would exclude, that it wouldn't really do more than scratch the surface of the problem of a lack of transparency in the police department.
And Chicago's homicides are up 14% compared to the same time last year, and Police Superintendent David Brown is preparing the department for that annual spike in summer violence. Take a look.
So if all that pent-up energy, because we've been quarantined, explodes with all of this, people being out, more people being active in the outdoors, we want to make sure it's safe.
Paris, is the police department doing anything different that hasn't already been tried to tamp down that summer violence spike?
Brandis, I don't hear anything different here, and U of I, all of us have covered crime in Chicago for long enough to know that the police come out, and the mayor comes out most every summer to say, here's what we're going to do differently this summer. We're going to flood the zone. We're going to have mobile strike forces. We're going to have cops on overtime. The reality is there's no magic bullet that's going to come from the police. I'm sorry, that's not a good allegory. There's no magic formula here that the police can utilize to tamp down crime. Maybe there's some things they can do to get it down a little bit, but it's the wraparound service. It's the underlying issues, mental health, gang mediation. All these things have to be a part of it, because the police cannot control the violence in the city on their own. It's in many ways out of their control. So I don't hear anything new this year.
Okay. And I was hoping we'd have a minute to talk about the first woman to serve as Illinois' Lieutenant Governor, Corinne Wood, who passed away after a long battle with breast cancer. But we will have to leave it there for now. My thanks to the Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Venicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. And you can find more on the stories discussed tonight with our Spotlight Politics team on our website. While you're there, make sure to read our story about how to submit name suggestions for Piping Plover's Monty and Rose's babies. It's all at WTTW.com/news. And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing, and you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website.
You can also get the show via podcast in the PBS video app, and please join us tomorrow night live at 7. We preview the art headed to the Merchandise Mart this summer.
And details into a new Chicago Stories documentary on civil rights leader Ida B. Wells. And for an additional behind-the-scenes preview of that documentary, be sure to check out a virtual event discussing the Trailblazers' life and legacy. That's tomorrow at 6 p.m. You can go to WTTW.com/events to RSVP. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, sponsors of the Chicago Police Memorial Foundation, dedicated to providing support for the families of officers injured or killed in the line of duty.